you to know there is no experience like it upon this earth when you can get to somebody who is walking in darkness and then pray for them and realize that they have seen a great light and they come to Christ and say, I surrender all to Jesus. There's nothing like the transformative power of Jesus the Christ. Jesus says, go. And I'm glad, Deacon Darby, he does not leave us guessing as to where to go. But Jesus is very direct in the target of the gospel. Where are we to go? Jesus says, into all the world. That ain't hard. That is not hard. That is not hard at all. He says, where do we go? We go into all the world. That means we don't get to choose where we go. Watch. That means that we don't get to be selective in our approach of the gospel, nor in the presentation of the gospel. We don't get to choose. We don't get to be selective. That means that we understand the gospel is a universal message. Stay with me. It is not exclusive. It is just not made for some and not for others. But all, listen, are invited to hear and to receive the good news of Jesus Christ. We have all kinds of inclusion programs and diversity trainings these days, but the gospel is the first and only true diversity and inclusion training there is. Nobody, listen to me, nobody, somebody say nobody. Nobody is excluded from the gospel, black or white, gay or straight, rich or poor, educated or uneducated, drunk or sober, upper class, lower class, or no class at all. The gospel is designed to reach everybody, everywhere, at any time. The gospel is for everybody. What I want to suggest is that there is no place inappropriate for the gospel of Jesus Christ. It is good for right here in the church, but it also works just as well in the hospital. Listen, it is good right here in the church. It also works well in the hospital, but it also works well right down there on Center Avenue, right in the bar, right where there's folk that don't even think about Jesus. It's not that they don't know, but sometimes it's just that they need to be reminded. And every now and then, we got to step in there and tell folk who are sitting up on the stool saying, pass me another one. Not for you, but you need to go in there and tell them that, listen, the grace of God still abides. Yes, the grace of God is upon us all. We live in a dispensation of grace. This is the grace age. And everybody is living by grace, whether you understand it or whether you realize it or acknowledge it or not. We are all living by grace. It's just that we up in here understand that. And we up in here acknowledge that we live by the grace of God. Because if it had not been for the grace of God, listen, none of us would be in here. But it's grace that keeps me. It's grace that protects me. It's grace that sustains me. It's grace that maintains me. It's grace that keeps blood running warm in my veins. It's grace that keeps me in my right mind. It's grace that keeps my hands moving. It's grace that keeps my legs working. It's grace that keeps air going in and out of my lungs. It's grace. Grace, it's grace, it's grace. And the only difference between me and some of the brothers I see stumbling going up the avenue with a bottle in their hand is that I acknowledge the grace and thank God for the grace that is in my life. But I'm living by the same grace that they're living by. Yet they don't realize it's grace that's keeping them too. It's grace that's keeping them alive. It's grace that's keeping them moving. It's grace. What I'm trying to suggest is that there is no place where the gospel is inappropriate, but in that it is to be shared with everybody everywhere. The problem is we like to be selective in our presentation. Stay with me. We like to choose the folk that we want to take the gospel to. We like to give it to those that appeal to us. We like to give it to those that look like us, that sound like us, that smell like us, that think like us. But we have to broaden our scope in order to fulfill the great commission of Christ. Let me see if I can help you. I was never more impressed than I was the other night at the Mel Blanc sort of celebrity roast. You know, Mel and his wife hosted over 700 guests of the elite in Pittsburgh at Heinz Stadium the other night. Everybody was there in the who's who of Pittsburgh. You know, Ben Roethlisberger was there, the Rooneys were there, Donnie Shell, executives from Highmark, Lamar Advertising and Dick's Sporting Goods. The president of the Urban League was there. CEOs of some of the major corporations in our city were there. Max Starks hosted. Brett Kiesel was honored. Mean Joe Green was sitting on the dais. I mean, folk were there. They were there. The who's who of Pittsburgh were there, along with the list of other celebrities and NFLers that was impressive enough to fill any who's who in America. There were 700 people in the room at $400 a plate and $10,000 sponsors. When Mel stood and took the mic, like he does every year, to give his remarks and State of the Youth Home Leadership Initiative, and he does something that to me was incredible. I said, look at my boy. I said, that's my man right there. He stood to the podium, took the mic. He said, I'm going to do something that I really have never done before. He said, but I'm compelled. He said compelled, but if he was in here this morning, I would tell him he's commissioned. He took the holy book. He opened up his Bible to Isaiah chapter 11 and started reading where it said, and there shall come forth a root and a rod out of the stem of Jesse, and a branch shall grow out of his roots. And the Spirit of the Lord shall rest upon him, the Spirit of wisdom and understanding, the Spirit of counsel and might, the Spirit of knowledge, and the fear of the Lord. And a child shall lead them. And I said to myself, oh my God, look at what he has just done. Because it's true that the gospel is appropriate anywhere and everywhere. So I stepped to him afterwards. And I said, bruh, I got to commend you. I got to applaud you. I got to let you know as your pastor, spiritual leader, and a preacher that you preached tonight. I need to let you know that indeed you shared the gospel tonight. And I said to him, listen, if not you to share that kind of message to the kinds of people, then who? I may never be able to stand in front of an audience like that when who's who that was a mile long, but when you got a chance to stand, Mel, you stood and you articulated well. Have you ever thought that you are where you are because it's not about a paycheck, but about spreading the word and winning souls to Christ? I'm not saying be crazy with it and everything you say is Jesus, but I am saying that you ought to make your life an influence for the gospel, that when people see you, they see the Christ, that when they hear you, they hear the love of God emanating from your lips, that when they see you, they see the presence of God all around you. I want to suggest that the gospel touches everybody, that the poor need it, and I want to suggest that the rich need it too. That the gospel is meant to touch everybody. That the gospel is the means through which every soul must be saved and make salvation available to us all. I'm not ashamed of the gospel of Jesus Christ. Oh, this is my country, isn't it? I'm not ashamed of the gospel of Jesus Christ, for it is the power of God unto salvation to everybody that believes. Okay, so as I hurry, we go into all the world and do what? Jesus tells us exactly what to do. He says, preach. So that when we go into the world, Jesus doesn't leave us guessing as to where to go, neither does he leave us guessing as to what to do. He says one word. He says, preach. It's that simple, brothers and sisters. It's not hard. It's not difficult. He says, preach. Tell the story of Jesus. That is not just a pastoral assignment, but that is an assignment for us all. We are part, listen, of the priesthood of all believers. We all should be ambassadors of Christ. We all should be representatives of the gospel of Jesus. That means we all ought to represent God in the world. That we have a message that we need to share, and that we are all a part of the preaching assignment. We all should have, in fact, a little preach in us. Don't wait to come to church to hear you preach. Listen, we all ought to have a little preach in us, at least enough preach in us to speak the promises of God to somebody else. We ought to have a little preach in us, at least enough to lead somebody to Christ. We ought to have a little preach in us, at least enough to get the enemy off our trail. We ought to have a little preach in us, enough to encourage those that are around you. We ought to have a little preach in us, at least enough that when we're standing in the midst of darkness, we ought to be able to preach light in a dark world. I'm just about finished, but preaching as expressed in one of the Yale series of lectures on the preaching suggests every living preacher must receive his communication direct from God, and the constant purpose of his life must be to receive it uncorrupted and to deliver it without addition or subtraction. When the preacher presents the message of his divinely appointed ambassadorship in its integrity, he speaks with that particular kind of authority which has been pronounced the first and indispensable requisite in giving a message from God. He manifests thereby a high celestial dogmatism, and human weakness becomes immortal strength. The preacher, the true preacher, preaches from a divine impulsion. He says with Paul, necessity is laid upon me, for woe is unto me if I preach not the gospel. The message of the preacher, listen, is greater than the man. The message of the preacher is greater than the woman, because it is from God Almighty. And all I'm trying to tell you is, don't be scared. Don't be ashamed. When you open your mouth and speak Jesus, it ain't you talking, but it's God speaking. When you talk about God, it ain't you, but it's the divineness of God that is inside of you that speaks the authority of God himself. Jesus said, go you into all the world and preach. We preach. And as the church, it is not ours to impede it, but to impart it. It's not ours to halt it, but to help it. We go into the world and preach the gospel, and as the church, it's not ours to pause it, but to promote the spreading of the word of God, so that if the church doesn't do anything else, we need to make sure the preaching is presented to the world. If we ain't doing nothing else, Deacon Darby, we need to make sure preaching is going forth from this church. And I just don't mean on Sunday morning, but I mean when God's people leave God's house, we ought to be spreading God's word. If we're not spreading God's word, then we've missed something while we're here, because something ought to ignite within your soul. Something ought to be set afire within your spirit, so that when you leave here, you ought to want to run and tell somebody about the goodness of Almighty God. Okay, so we ought to preach, and I'm just about there. We ought to preach, but we ought to preach what? Well, Jesus tells us exactly what to preach. He says exactly what we ought to preach, but he does not tell us to preach politics. He does not tell us to preach Wall Street. We are not to preach Hollywood. We're not to preach banking. We're not to preach jokes. We ain't supposed to preach riddles, not comic books, not Oprah. We ain't supposed to preach Jerry Springer. We ain't about preaching Medea. We're not trying to preach empire. We're not trying to preach power. We're not trying to preach fame and celebrity. We do not preach current events. We do not preach headlines. We ain't trying to preach bylines. We ain't trying to preach movie lines. We do not preach fads. We do not preach fashions. We ain't trying to preach cliches. We ain't trying to preach the things of the world. But the Jesus that we serve and know says, here's what we ought to preach. We ought to preach the gospel, nothing but the gospel, and only the gospel of Jesus the Christ. Jesus says, preach the birth, preach the life, preach the death, and preach the resurrection of our Lord Jesus Christ. Preach the gospel. That is the good news of Jesus, that he came to seek and to save them that are lost. We preach Jesus, the Lamb of God, that takes away the sins of the world. If you came looking for something else, if you came wanting to hear something else, I ain't got another message. I don't know another sermon. The only sermon I got is Jesus Christ. He died. Jesus Christ, he was buried. And Jesus Christ, he got up from the dead. That's all I know. And I'm determined not to know anything among you save Jesus Christ and him crucified and him raised. Because if we preach anything else. All right, hold on. Sit down just for a second. Sit down just for a second. Watch this. Because I think one of the major hindrances of the church today is that everybody is seeking a different message. We want a new age gospel. That's what we want. We want a gospel that makes us rich. We want a gospel that offers us fortune. We want a gospel that makes us feel good about ourselves. Just be honest for a minute. Just be honest. I know you're kind of looking at me strange, but just put a smile on your face just for a moment, just so you can fake me out if you have to. But that's really what we want. We want to come to church and know that everything all right. We want to come to church knowing that I feel good about me and myself and everybody around me. We want to come to church and hear a message that tells me I'm the greatest thing on the planet. We want to come to church and hear a message that promotes me. We want a message that highlights self. Well, listen, I don't know that gospel. I don't know that gospel because the gospel I preach is not about me. Listen, the gospel I preach is not about me, but the gospel I preach is about him. You're listening for big paychecks and how to get rich quick schemes and listening for name it and claim it and blab it and grab it techniques and how to make it to the top and get your name in lights. I don't know that gospel, Deacon Roberts. I don't know that one. In fact, the major indictment that I have with today's church is that we are trying to preach folk into success. We're trying to preach folk into big houses. We're trying to preach folk into luxury cars. We're trying to preach folk into $1 million checks. And we've neglected all the time while we're preaching folk into success, we've neglected to preach them into Jesus. Well, this morning, I ain't worried about your big car. This morning, I ain't worried about your big bank. This morning, I'm worried about the fact that your soul is anchored in Jesus. I need to know that your soul is right with God. What we want, Deacon Roberts, is a gospel that removes my suffering. We want a gospel that makes life easy. Well, I don't know that gospel either. We want prosperity preaching, and we want a no-fault gospel where I can do no wrong. I don't know that gospel either, but I do know a gospel that highlights my wrongs, tells me where I messed up, sees my suffering, and tells me that even when I mess up and fall off and derail, that I serve a God that can get me back where I need to be. I serve a God that can pick me up and turn me around. I serve a God that can take me as a nobody and save me and make me a somebody. I I serve a God and preach a gospel that even in the midst of my suffering, he says, I'll never leave you, nor will I ever forsake you. I've seen the lightning flash. It will not come by modern technologies or by scientific breakthroughs. It will not come by charismatic statesmen. If the world is to be renewed and restored to its original freshness and purity, it will not come by government intervention or cultural integration or social segregation. If the world is going to be a place of peace and an oasis of love, it will not come because we legislated it. It will not come because we picketed for it. It will not come because we boycotted. If the world is going to reach the pinnacle of its perfection and the harmony of the nations, it is only going to happen because of one thing, and that is because we preach the gospel of Jesus Christ. For the preaching of the gospel has outlasted Rome and many earthly empires. It has outlasted Chinese dynasties and outlasted Russian Kremlin, and it outlasted German Nazism. It has withstood the scouring of 2,000 years, and it still has the power to shake the heart and transform the spirit of whoever receives it. That's why we must preach the gospel until souls are saved and backsliders are reclaimed. That's why we got to preach the gospel until those who hate learn how to love. We got to preach the gospel until darkness turns to light and until joy replaces sorrow. We got to preach the gospel until black and white can sit down together and rich and poor can share in God's love. Preach the gospel with a heart of compassion and a spirit of joy. That's exhilaration. Preach the gospel knowing that someday he's coming back. That's with expectation. Preach the gospel knowing that when he comes, the dead in Christ are going to rise. That's anticipation. Preach the gospel with a conviction of knowing that only what you do for Christ is going to last. That's obligation. Preach the gospel with a courage that noting that nothing is going to stop you nor stand in your way. That's determination. Preach the gospel with a fervor that is a hot reality. That's inspiration. Preach the gospel with a warmth that others will receive. That's motivation. Preach the gospel with a word that declares the penalty of our past sins have been forgiven and that we will rise someday. Preach the gospel until the church is edified. Preach the gospel until the devil is terrified. Preach the gospel until God himself is glorified. We need to go preach. We need to tell everybody, yes, I got to run and tell everybody that Jesus lives. Who else can change your life? Who else can transform your mind? Who else can give you a new start? Who else can give you new destiny? Nobody but the love of Jesus. Can't nobody do me like Jesus. Can't nobody do me like Jesus. Go preach. Go preach. Go preach. Go preach. Go tell everybody that Jesus lives. That's our mandate. That's our great commission, that we go preach the gospel to every creature and to all of creation. For redemption has come. Redemption has come. Salvation is present. And it's for all those who will receive the message of God, the gospel of Jesus Christ. It's real, it's true, and it's alive. Come on, stand with me this morning. Stand with me this morning. Go preach, go preach, go preach, go preach, go preach, go preach. Tell everybody you know. Tell everybody you see that Jesus lives. That's preaching, you know. That's preaching, you know. When you just run and tell somebody that Jesus lives, tell them Jesus lives. And because he lives, you can live today too. You don't have to live a life that's down and rugged and full of darkness. But Jesus came to change our world. Jesus came to save our souls. He came to change our description of who we thought we might be. Because even in our best efforts, I mean, on the days we think we are shining and doing well, the psalmist says, without God, we are altogether vanity. Man at his best state is altogether vanity. Even when we think we got it all together. Without Jesus in your life, without having a God-centered description of who you are, we'll come to discover one day that we were really nobody at all. You know, it's been said so many times that it's probably overdone, overcooked, but I think it's worth saying today that really, you know, we in this country are all about climbing the ladder of success. That's what we want to do. We just want to climb the ladder of success. Any way we can get up there, that's where we want to go. We just want to climb up. We won't be successful. That's what we won't be. Forget about being significant. We want to be successful. That's what we want. We want to be successful. We want to be successful people. We want to stand in the crowd and say we are successful people, and we're going to do whatever we got to do to climb the ladder of success, even if I got to work 3 jobs that I hate. Because I'm going to climb this doggone ladder. Yeah. Even if I got to step on people to get onto the top, get to the top rung, I'm going to step on them, do whatever I got to do. Because I'm going to climb this doggone ladder. I'm going to climb this ladder of success. You know the problem with that? You know the problem with climbing that ladder of success, especially if you're doing without Jesus, is that someday you will come to discover that the ladder was leaning against the wrong building. That's the real problem with what we've been fed since we were in 2nd grade, since we were what we've been taught since we were in kindergarten. Yeah, you can be what you want to be. You can do what you want to do. That success is a great goal. But don't get to the top of the ladder and discover it's leaning against the wrong building. I know too many folk who have climbed that ladder, listen, that have climbed that ladder, got all the money in the world, got luxuries galore, walk around in furs and diamonds on their fingers and gold around their neck, got buku cars, living in big fancy houses. They invited me over. I saw how they live it. I said, ooh, y'all living large. That's what it looked like from the outside. Until they said, Pastor, can I come and meet with you? I need to talk with you about some things. Come to find out they're the saddest people in the world. They got all kind of stuff, but have never accepted the Savior. I want to introduce Jesus to you. I ain't trying to preach you into success. You can get that at Barnes & Noble in a book on the shelf. I ain't trying to preach you into success. I ain't really trying to preach you into big money and lavish lifestyles. I ain't trying to preach you into luxurious living. If it comes, so be it. But what I'm trying to preach you, I'm trying to preach you into Jesus. And let you know when Jesus is all you got, Jesus is all you need. And then when you come to discover that Jesus is all you need, he said, if you seek first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, then all of these other things shall be added unto you. We get our priorities so mixed up. We're chasing things instead of chasing God. want to help somebody today. I'm just trying to help somebody today. Because I don't want you to end your life, whenever it's going to be. I don't want you to end your life and come to find out that you made it to the top of your ladder. You reached the top of your class. You made it to the top of your profession. You made it to the top of your career. But your career, your profession, your class, and your ladder were all leading on the wrong building. What a sad commentary on life. What a wasted life. Will you come?